From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Well, good afternoon, welcome. Forgive my voice. I'm Fenella France, Chief of the Preservation Research and Testing Division, and along with my Director, Mark Sweeney, I want to welcome you here today. It's the 67th Topic in Preservation Series presentation. I want to also welcome our external viewers from New York to California and as far afield as Abu Dhabi today, so clearly an impressive speaker. Our speaker today is Douglas White, the National Software Reference Library Project Leader at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and I know many of you already know him well. He leads the project for the National Institute of Standards and Technology. He's had 25 years of experience with distributed systems, databases, and telecommunications protocols, real-time biomonitoring, real-time video processing, systems administration, and network monitoring. He holds both a BA and an MS in Computer Science from Hood College, member of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, the Association of Computing Machinery, and the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineering. I met Doug at the NIST Forensics Conference last year, and I was delighted to hear about the project and to see how much of a crossover there was between both the physical preservation that we're doing in terms of forensics, but also the digital preservation. So I'll now hand over to Doug, and he'll talk to you about the reference library.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you, Fenella, for the invitation. I'll go over a brief overview of both the Stanford collection and the NIST collection, talk about the processes that we use in what we do, and then also talk, as Fenella said, about the crossroads between forensics and curation. Just to start with, I will be mentioning several products and company names. That does not imply endorsement or necessarily recommendation. So the NSRL was started in 2001 as an unbiased source of metadata. And our software collection is both a physical and a digital collection. We have a collection on shelves, and we also download and save software applications. And it's used primarily by law enforcement organizations. And I say unbiased because NIST is not a vendor. We are not a software manufacturer. We're not a law enforcement agency. When we were approached by the law enforcement agencies, they were looking for someone impartial, such as that. And we also have that physical collection as a traceability behind all of the metadata that we collect and harvest from the packages. So we produce short data profiles that uniquely identify files. And those, you'll hear me mention a phrase, hashes, and that's a shorthand for the secure hash algorithm, usually in one case, the SHAs or MD5's, message digests. You may see when you download software, someone will say, get this signature to make sure you've downloaded the correct file. That's usually an MD5 or a SHA. And that helps us determine which files are important as evidence, or helps the law enforcement agencies determine that, because as a hash or a cryptographic hash is the same as essentially the same as a human fingerprint. It can uniquely identify someone or an object, but you can't recreate the person or the object from that short hash. So when a computer is seized as part of an investigation, the fingerprints of all the files are collected compared to the fingerprints or the profiles that we publish, and you can automatically eliminate benign files from the collection that you've seized. So we also aim to be useful to other researchers by expanding our holdings, performing other measurements on what we have. And right now, our data set includes the information of over 1,500 manufacturers, over 500 operating systems, and over 500 categories. So basically, we do have a physical collection. This is in a very secure room, badge access. It's treated basically as an evidence locker. And you can see another view down our shelves. We have some of the software in its original packaging. Several of the things we've had to put in the white boxes you can see on the screen as separate packaging. The Stanford University Library's Cabrinety Collection is officially the Stephen M. Cabrinety Collection in the History of Microcomputing. It's a fascinating collection. This young man in the mid-70s up until 1995 thought that someone should be collecting these objects, both the software and hardware, for historical reasons. And he went about doing it and did a fantastic job. He died early, just before his 30s, and his family donated that collection to Stanford University in 1998. And what it contains is over 6,300 pieces of computer software, focuses on several gaming systems, has over 27 different operating systems represented, and the formats are quite a wide range. The 8-inch floppies, 5s, 3s, all kinds of cartridges and cassettes, CDs and DVDs too. It actually goes up to that early modern era. Basically, the first paragraph there is what NSRL is interested in, the software applications, the software products. But the collection also has, the hardware, the pieces of computer hardware, all sorts of peripherals, game controllers, etc., and a wonderful array of documents. So our scope of work, NIST renders the material that we receive into images, both photographic images and disk images or media images. Image is a term that is hotly debated in the forensics world as to what that definition really is. But for us, we make the bit-for-bit copies of the original software. And it's not to the point where you could recreate the media. We're more interested in the content. So we're not making duplication-level copies of the media. But we return the originals to Stanford and retain the disk images and photographic images in our collection, and we make the software hashes and the other metadata available to Stanford. Stanford is going to make their entire code available once they address the intellectual property issues, and then researchers will be able to explore that collection. So it's a cross-country collaboration between Stanford and NIST. The special collections staff at Stanford catalog and prepare the materials and ship it to NIST. The software, disk images, and photography for the box covers and the manuals and different inserts then is sent back to Stanford. And they're going to be responsible, Stanford is going to be responsible for the project management and the acquisition from our output. So we hope this will contribute valuable information for future software preservation activities. I know several of you have said you're interested in what we're doing in this process. We'll be able to track the success rates for reading the data off of that old media. NIST had some data aging experiments that were done about a decade ago. Now we're living that. So it is fascinating to see what we can and can't read these days. And in addition, the Stanford team will contact the holders of the intellectual property rights, and I know that's beginning. That'll tell us more about the software industry's support for the preservation activities. So just as an example of one of the packages that is owned by NSRL, this is Turbo Pascal 1.5, now supports MS Windows 3.1. This is a personal fondness of mine because I used this package in school. I couldn't afford it as a student, but I had access to it in school. It's one of the older things that the NSRL owns. And you'll see that we actually do we affix labels onto the boxes. So there are usually 3 labels on there. Some are on the spine. But we try and we do not cover up any information such as the operating system that you usually find on the spine, some of the data that we need to collect. But we're not necessarily careful at preserving the original materials. In some of the disk inserts, some of the disk sleeves will have labeled things with a archive quality Sharpie, for instance. We're more interested in the content of the media, as opposed to in Cabrinety, you have iconic packages, such as Tetris. I don't know very many people who don't have a reaction when you see this, or you know, the After Dark flying toasters, some of the original software. This actually came to us in one of the early shipments, still shrink wrapped. And I'm standing here still getting goosebumps right now. I stopped what I was doing and called them on the phone. And you sent me a shrink-wrapped copy of Tetris. You know, I'm supposed to open this. Yes. Okay. You know, and so off we went. And it's just magical, some of the things that are in that collection. So their preparation, basically, they're paging their archival boxes out of long-term storage. All of this has been in storage, and they review the contents. Now they're doing the unwrapping. I don't have to worry about shrink wrap. They're taking care of that. They're also verifying the box contents via their identifier, which is called a druid. That'll come up a little bit later in some of the slides. And they're verifying the number of media for each druid. And they're also identifying the unusual ephemera. So there may be interesting toys, food items, any number of things that were sold with these games that have been stored for decades that they necessarily don't need photographed or is something that we shouldn't handle. And we're happy with that, too. And then metadata for each box. They have some metadata is imported into an NSRL database via a web interface, and the boxes are shipped to NIST. So this is an example of a druid. I just picked one. You'll see we have this cover sheet comes with every product that Stanford ships to us in boxes. So it's got a barcode, it's got a 10 or 11 digit identifier. And you can see a little bit of description there, the Hoyle solitaire game. If you get used to reading some of the strings, you can tell which box it was from, et cetera. But it equates to an actual package. So this is one of the packages that we get from them, and you'll see that in our photos that we take of the objects, we throw in a color, one of the golden thread color targets. To actually make sure that if the cameras are slightly out of alignment, they can be realigned, or also that they can be adjusted by the researchers in future. And as an example, in the insert there, you can see some of that extra metadata that this needs a hard disk, needs a mouse. It is MS-DOS. It is a 3.5-inch floppy. Yeah, and even some of the cards that it supports. So then when the boxes arrive at NIST, they're logged into our secure library, into that room with the compacting shelves and all of the access. We lock the box using our web interface so that the metadata can't be modified from that point on. At any particular point in time, Stanford can update or correct any of the metadata that they have put into our system. But once it's on site, we lock that in the database while it's going through our processing. And we inventory the items in the box and compare that with the actual contents. So the boxes then are transitioned to our workroom for photography and for media copying. This is just an example of a box. It can have a dozen or two different products inside of it. The web interface that I've been talking about, this is what the Stanford people see on their side. We have a database that they can get to, that they can add to on the public server. We then replicate that onto our air-gapped network nightly. So they can update their information, but once this is one of the reasons why we lock it, that there isn't live data onto our air-gapped network where we're doing all of our real work. But when they log in, they have a main page where you can see some of the more recent druids and some of the application names. They can sort by box and see the status, whether something is locked or unlocked. If they click on the box number, they can actually dive into the contents, the separate titles there. And if you click on a particular title, you can dive into the metadata. So this is the amount of metadata that Stanford will bulk upload into our system, into our database. So it's a limited amount, but it's enough, of a description of the product, of the media that are included, and some of the description that also supports the metadata that we publish down the road. If they don't have information that they can bulk upload, we have a form where they can enter that metadata. There are a few fields, open fields at the top of the form, where you can add the druid, add the application name. Those are open, not necessarily validated. But then down below, where you have to enter the software media type, or the language, or the operating system, or a manufacturer, we actually have taken the knowledge from both our previous application, or our previous work, and also their metadata, and added those into pick lists. So it's very easy. No one has to remember to enter English with a capital E, or Microsoft, spelled a certain way, or Microsoft Inc. spelled a certain way. It's just click and add. So it's very streamlined to a certain point where it's dictionary based and just click over into the list. If languages, manufacturers, et cetera, aren't there, it's very easy to add them. So as a super user, as an administrator, only certain people have access to actually add the new fields. So if we run across a language for an application or a product that we don't have, it's easy enough to add. And this all gets vetted too. So our particular workstations look like this. Pretty simple. We've got a camera stage, and usually we have 4 Apple Mac Minis. One's a head unit, and the other 3 drive the media, either floppies or DVD drives. And basically all of the information is browser-based. We have one command line script, but it's basically browser-based off of that one Ubuntu Apple Mini. And just to list it out, yeah, we have the Apple Minis running Ubuntu 12.04, 5,000 Kelvin lighting station. We started out with scanners, but cameras really were faster. So we've got a set of Canon T3Is. We can shoot them raw. We can convert those into TIFF, but you'll see a little bit later we've settled on JPEG for now. We also have the golden thread object level targets to make sure that we can keep the history of the colors down the road. Common USB 3.5-inch floppy drives. We use the FC5025 floppy controllers and commodity 5.25-inch drives. We have the USB barcode scanner for reading in those druids. And then as far as software goes, like I said, a Firefox browser that can display the JPEGs, the photographs that we take. We built a custom Java photo organizer, and you'll see a screenshot of that, but that wraps some of the common software that comes with Ubuntu and Linux, Gphoto, for example. And the one command line tool was built in Perl, and that's the media imager. That's custom, and that basically wraps some of the forensics tools like DCFLDD. So particularly for the photography task, we try and keep it simple, keep it quick. Come in, power on the camera and lights, start the photo organizer app, scan the Druid barcode into the app, and that persists. Place an object on the photo stage with the color target. There are about 5 basically there's 2 checklists to check in the photo organizer app. the 3 fields to enter. Some of those persist. And then click Submit, and photograph is taken, and if there's an error, follow a remediation process. Otherwise, rinse and repeat. And it's composed to the scanners, which would sit there and just sort of draw out their scans. The photography is a fantastic upgrade. Large bound items, we only do manuals up to 70 pages in size. Anything over that, some of the really thick manuals are just out of our scope. But we have an ATIS book drive, one of the 90-degree book drives where we can take the photos of both sides of large bound items. This is just a screenshot of that Java app where when you scan in the Druid, it goes into the first field. When we used to use the scanners, you could check that you were using a scanner rather than a camera. We need to deprecate that box. You can check in the auto incrementing, so if you're going through 20 WordPerfect floppies, that'll auto increment, so you don't even have to worry about typing in the next number, ID number for that. Type number is rarely used, and you'll see examples of that. And then we've got the dictionary, basically, of the types of objects and the views. And it's just, pick that, if it is the box front that you're photographing, box front, select, or submit, and the picture's taken. And you get an immediate review. So if there is a glare issue, if there was a focus issue, you can retake it very quickly right then. And basically the five fields get combined for the output. So these are the file names that we return to Stanford. And you can see the Druid, the ID number, especially when you get down into the several floppies. You can see those have auto-incremented. You get a little bit of information about the type of media, 3.5-inch floppy, 5 1/4 floppy, was it the front or back? So it's a little bit of the data built into the file name, but it's easily parsable. So you end up with the front of a box looking something like this. And if you have an insert that is key to, in this case, the game, like the psionic ability chart, you can't do research on this game without knowing your abilities. So these are any of the things, examples of the things that we're returning back. As far as disk imaging goes, it's a slightly longer list, but basically power on the external drives, start our disk imaging app in the web GUI. You'd need to scan the Druid into the imaging app and then identify the media number. So you can do that by actually going back to the photos that are in Firefox. So what's been identified as disk number 1, one would think one would pick the install as number 1, but it can be anything really. Find that media, place that media in the drive, type the media number into the imaging app, and if it's a 5 1/4-inch floppy disk, we have an optional step where it will realize from the database that ID and Druid that you've typed in that it is a 5 1/4, and it will sense and then query you to make sure that you've picked the right format, that you're not trying to do Atari for a Commodore. It'll just say, this is what I'm about to do, this is what I've sensed, correct, yes. Off you go. Disk imaging occurs with the floppies 3 to 5 minutes usually, because it's a full imaging step, transferring it over to our network storage and then verifying it on that end with the cryptographic hashes. CDs, DVDs, they can take a little bit longer. Some of the MSDN DVDs can take 40 minutes, 45 minutes. But since you've got a couple of drives at each station, if something's going to take a little bit of time, you can work on the next drive. So you can do basically this list 3 times in parallel, 4 times in parallel, actually, depending on the media at each station. So you can keep going at a pretty good pace. The media image listing, you'll see here, maybe you can see here, this is a little bit small. You have the Druid as a top-level directory. Underneath that, you've got the hash of the media image, and there could be several. You'll see here we've got Druid-1, Druid-2, Druid-3 for different pieces of media. If one of those was a hard disk with several volumes, or a DVD with multiple instances on it, multiple file systems on it, or a double-sided disk, you would have a subdirectory underneath there for each one of those images that came off that piece of media. And we record the errors, the DD errors, disk duplication errors. In this case, there are none. Those files are empty. The actual image, for these floppies, they've all come out to be the same size. The SHAs, we have the SHA of the image, that follows it, the signature of that image follows it throughout its history, so you can always verify that the contents haven't changed, whichever storage you're on. And then we have a string about mounting that image. We always go back and test it, mount it, to see that we can read from it. And if there are errors, that string, that file would have some response in it. So we can go back and check those. So we're logging several different things, several different steps along the way. This is where I sort of wave my hands and say magic happens, without going into another 2 hours about what the NSRL does on our hashing stations. But we have a cluster of machines then that access those disk images, mount them, go into the contents. If there are cab files, if there are zip files, they will recursively open those, process all of the contents, go down into all the directories, all the files that they can. And we return about 20 tables, 20 database tables of information back to Stanford. And actually, we make those publicly available for anybody who asks for the whole NSRL, although now it's 10 terabytes of data. If you ask, you have to give us a disk. But the application data is that minimal, for Stanford, is that minimal amount of information that they already provided. So that's their information coming back to them bundled up, plus the metadata like the path, the file names, extensions, bytes, the date and time stamps for the files, et cetera. File types, there are magic signatures that tell you if something is a GIF, a JPEG, how compressed it is, what type of binary it is, what particular kind of executable it is, and we get that information back. Plus, we publish then a reference data set format data set and give that back to Stanford also. So that is all the files, all the information in our normal publication format. So I didn't touch upon cartridges. This is an example of a retrode device used for reading some of the game cartridges. And we're just getting into this. We're using that for the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo games. There's also plugins for Game Boy, Atari, N64. But we found that unlike the other media that I've been talking about, we could not generate consistently a complete media image. So you can't take that one global picture of the contents of the cartridge, at least not with the retro device, because there are some files it creates. There's also the saved game data, et cetera, that you get access to. So we have to focus particularly just on the ROM information, just on the game ROM information. And it turns out that every cartridge has a ROM header area, and thankfully engineers built in a checksum there. So that is a wonderful place where we can go in, we can calculate the checksums based on what we've captured and go make sure that it matches what's in that ROM on that cartridge. So we've been able to do that for the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, and we're working on Game Boy and Nintendo. And actually, one of our students has a detailed blog article that's going to be coming out and published by Stanford. But that's been fascinating work also. But there are also remaining issues. Apple physical formats. Those have been troubling. It's hard to get access to The physical drives, if you're familiar with the Apple software and the Apple media, they were written completely differently physically from the MS-DOS, the IBM style media. We have access to some of the devices. It's just a matter, I'm an optimist, so it's just a matter of time and expertise and documentation. You know, we can solve this, it is solvable. So we will get to that. The large format floppy disks, the 8-inch drives, that hardware is disappearing. I know where I can get some, but that's an issue that the horizon is receding. Cartridge batteries have also been an interesting topic. The batteries will die inside the cartridges. So that is something, fortunately, more for the people on the Stanford side to deal with. We're not going to do surgery on the cartridges. And cassettes. We haven't even handled a cassette yet. And I remember using some of them growing up, and well, I don't want to say I don't want to handle them anymore, but I'm not really looking forward to it. So we get to the crossroads of curation and forensics. Now, these two lists aren't meant to correspond with each other. One, on the one side, I've listed some tools and some concepts from forensics and from curation, that there is some crossover that we've seen. Specific tools are being used. Some of the ideas about interchanging the data, high reliability storage, triage, just, you know, we're all being inundated by data. How can you quickly determine that something is of interest? And that depends on how you define interest. So it's very fascinating to see how what goes on in forensics and investigations could be applied to the labs and also in curation. And then, obviously, some of the people, I'd have to mention Fenella. Fenella made the connection, you know, at the forensics conference at NIST. Trevor also has certainly been supporting NIST here at the library. Henry and Michael at Stanford. And then, of course, any list is going to leave off any number of people. Mark Mattienzo, I'm always keeping an eye on what he's doing. He's making good use of forensics tools. Simpson Garfinkel, Vasil Rusev. And then media conservators. I mean, these are the people, now that I'm really having physical media problems, the conservators are the people that I've got to start picking their brains. And especially with the cartridges, the amateurs and enthusiasts, you can't overlook them. There are some people who just love this media, love this concept, love the history, and they're a good resource to tap. As far as other things that NIST is doing, how we can leverage what we're learning here on the law enforcement side and also with Stanford, we're doing application disk prints. So we are actually taking those disk images that we have on network storage of operating systems and of applications, and we can mount them automatically in virtual machines. And we're taking slices in time of the process. You know, what is that first boot of an operating system? What is the state memory, registry, everything if you're talking about Windows? What is the next state when you go through registration? What is the next state when you actually execute a program? So we're building the disk prints and tracing all the history of bringing up several flavors of Windows operating systems, bringing up, you know, Microsoft Office, a lot of the larger packages now. We're taking requests about what people think are interesting to fire up. So I know we were talking earlier about, you know, if you've got an old WordStar file, yes, we can fire up an old Windows operating system in a VM with an old version of WordStar, and we can find out what's in that file. We could save that out for you, or let you look at it. Digital forensics XML, the DFXML, there's got to be a way to describe all of this information that we're collecting in the disk prints and also just the objects that we're creating. So we're looking at that XML as an interchange language. And actually all of these things are up on our webpage. Approximate matching, as opposed to the cryptographic hashes where if you have a text file 7 years ago, someone changes it to 7 years ago, you're going to have wildly different fingerprints. My fingerprint and a hoof, basically would be the difference between those, as far as a cryptographic hash is concerned. Approximate matching gives you a way to measure the distance between differences in files and differences in objects. We're also getting involved with ISO 19770-2, the software identification tags, the SWID tags, based on asset management. So we have this wonderful catalog of all these old titles, all this information about vendors and software creators. We're feeding that out into the dictionary for that ISO standard. That can also be ways of managing assets. And last but not least, certainly our sister project in our division, the Computer Forensic Tool Testing Project. They review a lot of the tools and devices for disk imaging, for write protection, for string searching. There are a lot of tools out there, as you saw from the very short list in the last slide, that are getting reviewed, and you can read the test reports on those to see, in some cases, certain operating systems or certain interfaces, ATA versus SCSI, will affect the use of some tools. So those reports are out there. And I'll finish up with our contact information. And if there are any questions, certainly feel free to contact any of us, both of us at Stanford and at NSRL. And if there are questions from the room or the internet.
Well, thank you, Doug. It's great to actually, it's something we've been working on here at the library, is the integration between physical and digital preservation, the fact that you can't separate them. It really is one integrated field. Do we have any questions either from external or from the audience? Everyone's pondering. I have one question. I'm curious, and I was thinking about it earlier. Doug, you mentioned that you have challenges with the formats and actually reading them, and I know that's an issue here at the library. Where do you have a secret stash of accessing, 8-inch floppy readers, or how are you dealing with that challenge?
Not really a secret stash, but I'm a notorious pack rat, and fortunately a lot of people at NIST are also pack rats. About a week ago, I had someone actually say, would donate some software, but then he said, come take a look in this lab, and he's got this rack that he has hauled along every place he's worked since he was a college student, and he's about to retire in a month. And he said his wife wouldn't let him keep it at home. But it's the kind of thing with a large, basically a CPU-sized 10 meg disk drive in it, and a couple of the 8-inch floppies. So there are some still around, certainly on our campus, and I know some other people. Again, the hobbyists I could tap, and I'm certainly hoping that someone here has some devices that I don't have that maybe I could borrow. But yeah, I find once you get the word out, people get excited about reading that old media. So it's good.
Define what you mean by disk imaging.
Disk imaging, right. Creating a bit-for-bit copy of the media. So I think I said before, I'm not interested in necessarily making a perfectly working duplicate floppy disk or CD, because in some cases there's that hardware-based, what do I call it, like intellectual property control there are some out-of-band places where information is written to enable the games to run. We've always been interested more from the point of view of what's the content of the files. So one of the tools I mentioned was DCFL-DD, stands for the Defense Cyber Forensics Lab, and then DD is just disk dump. DD was a common Unix Linux tool, but it's had several revisions. Again, at the CFTT site, they review some of the variations of that tool. It's very simple. It just really does a bit-for-bit dump out of what it reads off the media.
And what kind of software is used for that?
It runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux. We tend to use Linux. We've tried almost from day one to stick to open source solutions. Should funding or time or whatever disappear on us, we want to be able to roll everything up and be able to hand it to somebody. As a matter of fact, that's one of the other reasons that NIST was chosen by law enforcement is we're completely open. We can give away the code. There are certain types of files that we cannot store on our campus. It would be illegal for us to store on our campus, but we can give that code to agencies to produce the same type of data set that we do.
Is that related at all to the save image function in a recording program like Sonic?
I'm not really familiar with that. I would doubt it if that's, well, I don't necessarily want to guess. Yes?
The formats that disk images go to, and we're mostly familiar around here with ISO for, replicas, CDs, and so on, seem to be fairly well established. I guess there must be a handful of them that's used for floppy disks and so on. DD is one, I guess. When you get to the cartridges and cassettes, I hadn't thought about this, is part of the problem that since the data isn't in these neat sectors that you get on disks, it's hard to say where the first bit is and where the last bit is, so to speak. It's sort of indefinite where it starts and indefinite where it stops, which means you can't do it twice the same way.
There's some of that, but there's also with that retro device, when you plug the cartridges into that, it acts like an external USB device, and there are some strings in a local file that the Retroid software itself creates, timestamps, date stamps that are always changing. So it's almost, excuse me, it's almost like if you're plugging in a USB thumb, usually there's a certain key with that, a certain name will pop up on your desktop, a certain identifier will go into the registry, but it's very similar to that name or that identifier changing every time you mount the cartridge. So we can see the game save data, we can see the raw ROM, we can see all the files on there. We just can't wrap a DD around it to get that one image that we're used to creating. But I don't think that ends up being a problem. If we can get that ROM and make sure that the copy we've made, we can perform that checksum and check it back against the original, I think we're good. Yes, true. Sorry.
I'm just wondering if you had any examples of how your collection was used for forensic purposes.
Could you just repeat the question? For
Oh, right. Examples of how our collection is used for forensic purposes. The law and
talk about.
Yeah. Well, it's, none of us have clearances on the project, which was our boss's idea, and I praise her every day for that decision. There are some things I don't want to know. And likewise, the law enforcement uses, that's a community you rarely hear back from. Well, let's see. We know that the data is downloaded thousands of times monthly worldwide. I think there are probably some international listeners here who probably use the data set. One example that I do like to give, it's not necessarily a use of the data per se, but a few years back there was an incident in Florida where some botulinum was released and injected into some people before it was diluted down to a safe level. And the FDA responded to that. They needed a particular version of QuickBooks to open the records that would show where that was shipped. They didn't have that version. The site where they were didn't have that version. They had donated some information to us in packages to us in the past, and they recalled us and said, do you, because they had gone through customer support, and it was Friday afternoon, whatever. Then no one was there, but we fortunately were home, and said, yes, we actually have this. Yes, we will make a working copy that you can borrow for a limited amount of time to open this data up. They drove up to NIST, took it down to the airport, flew it down to Florida, were able to open it up and get to the people in time. So that's probably the most dramatic story I can tell, because otherwise just winnowing hundreds of thousands of files off of a computer just isn't really sexy. Useful, but it saves a lot of time.
Oh, I was gonna. You gave a great explanation of exactly how it works with Stanford, what you're doing, and what's going back and forth. But I think folks might be interested in sort of what you guys get out of it, what Stanford gets out of it. Sort of what's the sort of value each of you get, and if this is a model you're looking at with other groups too. Right.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes. We are certainly interested in collaborating with any other collections that have a retention policy such as Stanford's. That we know that the original media isn't going to disappear anytime soon. But basically, we get all of the files, all of the metadata to publish as part of our reference data set, which you would think some of these titles weren't very useful in investigations, but everybody is going back doing retro gaming using emulators. There are people firing up their old Commodore 64s to do some interesting things, and so yeah, we really need that information. Stanford, on the other hand, they go from the boxed long-term storage items that are hard to page out, hard for anybody to access, to bootable, playable disk images you can fire up in an emulator. You can do that research. You have the photographs, just as we've been photographing our own items so that we don't have to pull them off the shelves anytime we need to check metadata to do anything. We're looking towards hands-off. That's that same hands-off attitude for Stanford, that they can page everything back into the storage but have everything playable, everything there for researchers.
In a past life, I was a librarian at a software company, and I'm wondering, your system didn't exist yet. Is anyone else using your system for archiving software?
Not that I know of. We certainly have the Perl modules. We've got a Linux ISO. Anybody can boot up a machine and create a data set in our format if they want. It's not really a community where you get a lot of feedback. So it's, we've released our code and everything, and I don't know.
One more question. You showed us a slide of the physical storage, and given that storage is such an issue, I'm just curious whether you had that looked like it was custom built for this, and how much expansion you have available. And then also in terms of disks that you have that aren't readable, are you working closely with the forensics in terms of the tools that you use to try and capture that data off the corrupted disks?
Right, I'll do it in reverse order. As far as the problem disks, reading the problem disk, yes, we're always looking at better tools to put into our process. We capture those errors, those disk read errors, so we can go back and look more closely at the sectors or areas where there are problems. So we've tried to build everything modularly so that we can plug in a new hashing algorithm, SHA-3 is coming out, or plug in a new unarchiving, unzipping algorithm, or plug in a new way of going back and reprocessing that media. So yes, we're always looking at that and keeping abreast of the tools. And then the other question, as far as storage, was that more of a size question?
Just curious, you showed the customized space.
Really, it's a commodity SAN where we're keeping everything. Everything we do is air-gapped. So we've got our own network between our workstation room and our server room. And even some of that is firewalled and gapped too, because we have a parallel environment that actually I should mention too. But no, it's common SAN software. As I say, we tried to make it so that if anybody needed to stand up a copy of this, it would be fairly easy. These days, you could probably buy a handful of 3 terabyte disks. We've got 70 terabytes of storage in that SAN right now. The NSRL uses about 20. We estimate that when we're done, Cabrinety would probably take up about 5 terabytes. So we have plenty of room for growth. And we always have, we have our production side, and then we also have a development side. So at any particularly given time, we can actually duplicate everything we have, database, et cetera, and test out algorithms, test out new processes. So we have to have some open space. But we also then have a duplicate of that environment where we've got the images, the disk images are available, and also the unique individual files are available in a corpus. We've got 33 million unique individual files off of all the pieces of media. Any investigator can come in and run an algorithm against our collection. Obviously, we can't attach it to the internet. There's intellectual property issues. The way that we treat it as evidence is an issue. But if you want to run an algorithm against all of the 1980s era DLLs, or all of the GIFs that we have, anything like that, you're welcome to get in touch with us. Come visit, and we're able and willing to run code on any subset of what we have.
Any other questions? Well, I'd like to thank Doug so much. This is fascinating, and it's an area that we're really getting into a lot here at the library, and a lot of challenges. Thank you all to our external viewers, and please feel free, if you're too polite to ask questions, to come up and talk to Doug. Can you join me in thanking him again?
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.